right, moving on. Some say it was bound to happen sooner than later. Others say that it's a flash in the pan. Whatever be the case, Google is refusing to budge. A Google spokesperson said that Android creates more choice, not less. Now the company plans to appeal against the European Union's eye-popping fine. Google has been fined $5 billion by the EU. The decision by the European Commission, the EU's regulatory arm, found that Google manages Android, which runs roughly 80% of the world's smartphones, in ways that illegally harm competition. The ruling focused on three practices. One, the bundling of Google's Chrome web browser and its search app as a condition for licensing the Google Play Store. Two, payments Google makes to phone manufacturers and telecom companies to exclusively pre-install the Google search app on their devices. And three, Google's practice of prohibiting device makers from running Google apps on Android forks or alternative versions of the software unapproved by Google. In its ruling, the Commission ordered Google to stop all of those practices. Now, the European Union hit Google with a record antitrust fine for abusing the dominance of its Android mobile operating system. It ordered Google to put an end to illegal conduct within 90 days or else face additional charges of up to 5% of Alphabet's average daily worldwide revenue. The ruling comes little over a year after the EU fined the company $2.7 billion for favoring its shopping service over competitors. All right, Jack Parrots joins me now from Brussels. Jack, the $5 billion may not be a large amount for Google, but they say that they will appeal against this decision. What is Google's defense?
Well, simply put, Google says that it doesn't break antitrust competition laws, that essentially that its practices of pre-installing these apps onto its Android system and making manufacturers pre-install them shouldn't be considered a breach of competition legislation. The chief executive of Google tweeted saying that rapid innovation, wide choice and falling prices are the hallmark of robust competition, and Google says that its work proves that that's happening, as that's the way the tech market is going. Now, $5.1 billion is not that much money for Google, which has around $110 billion in cash reserves, but that $5.1 billion will have to be put into a holding account as Google appeals this, and if it fails in its appeal, then that money will be distributed among the EU's member states. Currently, though, Google must change its practices within 90 days and stop the practices that the EU is so against. Otherwise, it will be forced to pay 5% of its total daily global revenue into the European Union. It will face that fine as well.
Indeed. And Jack, which other major technology companies are under the watch of the European Union investigators?
The other tech giants that the EU's taken on are Apple. They've fined them for a massive $15 billion around for tax avoidance in Ireland that Apple has now been started to repay. There was a case against Amazon as well regarding competition, regarding its power in the market regarding e-books. But really, it's been Google that's been in the sights of the European Commission. Just over a year ago, Google was fined $2.8 billion for a similar case regarding competition, but it was to do with its shopping services. So essentially putting its own shopping possibilities at the top of any search engine results, so that it would benefit from the shopping channels as well. So that was a big fine, but this one against Android is almost double that fine.
And also, Jack, we've seen in recent times that the European Union has intensified its scrutiny against the tech companies. Why is the EU taking a firm stance against some of them?
Simply put, it's high turnover companies, big tech giants, market dominance for many of them, and so the European Union goes for the big bucks, which is what you'd expect. Perhaps smaller competition cases don't matter so much for the wider set of consumers. Now, the European Commissioner for Competition, Margrethe Vestager, says that she just follows the letter of the law when it comes to these cases, that she has no anti-US bias, as some have claimed. Interestingly, a delegation from Brussels is heading to the US to be hosted by US President Donald Trump at the White House. The EU delegation will include the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, the Trade Commissioner and a number of others. And this Google case may be something that's brought up there, considering the trade tariff spat that's been going on between the US and the European Union after Donald Trump imposed 10% tariffs on steel imports from the European Union and a number of other places, and the European Union retaliated with tariffs of their own on American products.
Right, moving on, President Xi Jinping of China will be leaving for a tour of Africa and West Asia in what can be seen as Beijing's attempt to further cement its role as the region's closest economic and diplomatic ally. Now, Xi will travel to the UAE, Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa and Mauritius, where China's economic clout and strategic ambitions are growing. Currently, Chinese money is funding a 1,400-kilometer-long railway line in Nigeria, a highway in Algeria, and new cities in Egypt and South Africa. This week's trip is likely an attempt to strengthen China's hold over the African continent, with Xi Jinping possibly offering further investments. But with these deals comes immense debt for the African nations. Already, China accounts for more than a sixth of Africa's loans. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India is also travelling to East Africa at the same time as President Xi. It could be because both India and China are aware of the strategic significance of East Africa as an emerging market. The BRICS summit in South Africa later this month is likely to see a revving up of India's rivalry with China for influence in resource-rich Africa. Official sources said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to visit Rwanda and neighbouring Uganda on his way to South Africa for the BRICS summit starting the 25th of July. Modi will land in the Rwandan capital of Kigali a day or two after President Xi. Modi is expected to sign several agreements with both countries. And why not? India is looking to make headway in both the countries, where China has emerged as an important partner in post-conflict reconstruction work. All right, joining me now is Isabel Nakiria, correspondent from Kampala in Uganda. Thank you for joining us on WION Dispatch. Now, can you contrast the two visits of President Xi and Prime Minister Modi, the agreement that will likely sign on the occasion of their visits to the East African region?
Thank you. Uganda expects Prime Minister Modi on 24th of this month. He's expected to meet with President Museveni at the State House in Entebbe, and thereafter he will also meet a group of Indians. Over 30,000 Indians live in Uganda, and he's supposed to meet them. I think those are the business communities in Uganda. And then he'll also address Parliament, the Parliament of Uganda thereafter. But dating back to relations between Uganda and India, we understand that their relations began way back in 1965 when trade between the India and the East African nations was rife along the Indian Ocean. And that is when the trade began. And that brings a cultural tie between these two nations. India has played a big part in manufacturing, in the banking industry, in pharmaceutical industries in Uganda. We expect that when the Prime Minister Modi arrives here, those are some of the ties that he's going to discuss with President Museveni, and we expect a number of trade agreements to be signed between these two leaders. And of course, there is China on the other end, and we think that China has placed a big footprint in Uganda and East Africa as such, placing over $4 billion in aid to Uganda. And so India has got a big part to play in trying to outwin China's investment. But, you know, India plays a bigger role in cultural ties because it was here long before China, and over 200 Chinese companies are already here. So it's a big part that Prime Minister Modi will play and trying to bridge this gap and trying to create further bigger investments with Uganda when he comes.
Indeed, and very quickly, Isabel, now some people accuse China of practicing checkbook diplomacy or debt trap diplomacy. Now, how does Uganda look at ties with both India and China? Now, some people say that while China gives African people fish, India teaches them how to fish, and that's the qualitative difference between India and China when it comes to Africa.
What I think is that India was here long before China, and it has that advantage over China. And most of the big companies in Uganda are in Indian companies, though there are several other smaller companies that are here from India. But China just came recently, and it has amassed a lot of wealth here, invested a lot of big infrastructure developments here. It has invested in infrastructures like hydropower dams. It's building the airport in Uganda. It's also building roads and highways. So, and most of these companies are multi-billion, multi-million companies that India does not have here. So India has invested over $4 billion in Uganda. Though India has about 60% of the taxes that India puts directly in Uganda, and becoming one of the biggest taxpayers in Uganda, I think that China has a big advantage over India.
All right, on that note, Isabel, thank you so much for joining us on WION Dispatch. All right, moving on, you're innocent until proven guilty. Any allegation has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt for a guilty verdict. But is there any court in Pakistan that can prosecute its powerful rogue army? Arguably, no. But then there's perception, there's history, and that is what the Pakistani army cannot wish away. Because in the public eyes, proof does not prevail over perception. And they vote, the public votes. In Pakistan, they will vote on the 25th of this month, so it does not come as a surprise that Pakistani army is repeatedly trying to fight the battle of perception, a battle it is losing every time it tries to fight off. Yet again, a representative of the Pakistani army has said that the army has no direct role in the elections. The Pakistani army officer further said that the army is only providing support to civilian departments. He was speaking before a standing committee in the Senate, or the upper house of Pakistan's legislature. Now, hardly 10 days ago, a similar statement had come from the Pakistani army. Listen in.
अफवाज पाकिस्तान का किरदार इन इलेक्शंस में इलेक्शन कमीशन ऑफ पाकिस्तान की मावनत करना है. हमने उनको सपोर्ट देनी है उन तमाम टास्क में जो उन्होंने हमसे मांगे हैं. कंडक्ट में अफवाज पाकिस्तान का ये काम इलेक्शन कमीशन ऑफ पाकिस्तान का है और उनके दिए गए मैंडेट के मुताबिक हम उनकी सपोर्ट करेंगे. तो दिस हैज टू बी क्लियर कि वी आर इन सपोर्ट रोल.
And senior Pakistani journalist Imtiaz Gul now joins me live on WION Dispatch. Imtiaz, thank you once again for joining us on WION. Now, it's barely 1 week to go for the elections. How do you read or view Pakistani Army's all-pervasive role in these elections? Now, some say the script has been written, only the polling remains to be done on the 25th of this month.
Yeah, I think this is not an easy issue to explain. The army, if it had written in its script in 2002, for instance, then its favorite party, the Q League, failed in getting even a simple majority. Similarly, when General Pervez Musharraf was in power, even at that time, in the election of 2008, it appeared that its favorite party, the Q League, will win a big majority. But only to the contrary happened. And it was literally wiped out in the 2000 election after nearly 6 years in power. So this is, while the army's interference has been around as a part of the electoral process, as a part of the political process in this country, because by virtue of being the strongest, the most organized institution, it's I think really questionable as to whether the army can bend the will and the opinion of the people on the day of the vote itself.
Indeed, so all eyes, as Imtiaz says, on the 25th of this month when Pakistan goes to the polls. On that note, Imtiaz Gul, thank you so much for joining me on WION Dispatch.